we are going to take a look at how to play hymns. We're going to talk about filling out the sound when you're playing hymns. If you take a look here at this page of at Calvary, which is available for you to download and print so you can practice what we're going to go over here, but what you're going to find in the hymn book is the four-part harmony, the soprano, alto, tenor, and bass parts, and when played, it doesn't sound bad, but you seldom hear people playing like that when they play in church, and so they'll fill it out. They'll give it a much more full sound by adding notes. So how do we know what to add in? How do we know how to fill it out? And to take what's written in a hymn book and take it to this. And so we're going to go over that, how to fill out the right hand, how to add to the left hand a little bit. So before we jump in, you need to be familiar with your chords. And so when I say a certain chord, hopefully you understand, like if I say a C chord, you understand it's a triad built off of the key off of a C note, just like this. And then, of course, that also implies all these other inversions as well. So when I say a C chord, you need to be familiar with, this as a C chord, or this, or this. And that's kind of confusing to you, then go back to our lesson on the key of C, and that'll give you a good basis, a good understanding for what we're going over here. You need to know our scales, or your C scale. That's going to help you a lot, and we're going to get into some other hymns in different keys as well. So really, every time you practice, you ought to be going over your scales and all the scales you know. Ideally, you want to get to the place where you know all 12 major scales and then get into the minors, but 12 major scales is what's going to help you with your hymns. And so you need to know all 12 major scales and be able to play them fairly comfortably. But for now, as long as you know the C scale, you'll be able to keep up with this lesson. Okay, so let's jump into, let's just take a look, and we're going to spend a lot of time analyzing this sheet here before we actually go to the keyboard. So hopefully you're able to print this off. This is important that you have in front of you. Let's go ahead and take a look at this piece of music here. At Calvary. Again, this is straight out of the hymn book. Page you're going to find right out of the hymn book. So you'll see the soprano, alto, and tenor parts. And how do we analyze this and figure out what to do? First of all, this is in 4/4 time, and that's the most common time signature in music. So you want to be familiar with 4/4 time. And so in 4/4 time, there are two beats that you gotta emphasize. And if you can keep these beats, as long as you're playing what's right on these three beats, or these two beats, everything's gonna come together. So the first beat and the third beat. Now, what goes on in between those beats, a lot of times are going to be different than the chord that we're playing on the first and third beat. But as long as the first and third beat are consistent and they're right, and we're emphasizing those, everything's going to lock into place. And I'll demonstrate that for you in just a moment. But take a look at the first measure. All right, right here. This is the first beat, and then here is the third beat right here. Now this note is coming in on the right before the fourth beat. But take a look, we're actually playing a C chord during this measure, and I'll tell you how to figure that out in just a minute. We're playing a C chord, but these notes are not in the C chord. We're playing these notes. C, E, and G. Now these notes kind of clash with these notes, right? But they pass through unnoticed, and it gives the melody movement, and it sounds great And you don't have to worry about, well, what chord is that? Well, we got the first beat, we got the third beat, so we can play whatever we need to in between. And so just understand that as long as you gotta make sure you hit the first and third beat. You can even, if you're playing if you're accompanying a singer or playing for congregational singing, you can even just play the first and the third beat, and you'll do fine. Years I spent in vanity and pride, caring that my Lord was crucified. That was just the first and third beat. That'll keep everyone together. So the first and third beat, make sure that on the first and third beat, we've got those, whatever the chord is, we're playing it on the first and third beat. So how do we figure out the chord? Well, it's kind of like learning a new language. If you have never tried to analyze a hymn and figure out the chords, there's a couple things you need to remember. Is usually the chord will stay the same throughout a measure, and sometimes for multiple measures, but at least throughout a measure. And that's usually. You're going to come across songs where the chord changes every beat. You'll come across some hymns where it changes halfway through the measure. In fact, that's common. If it doesn't stay throughout the whole measure, it'll change right in the middle of the measure. But usually the chord will stay the same throughout the whole measure. So if we can analyze hymns measure by measure, then we can learn them much more easier. So let's take a look at the first measure of At Calvary. And this bass note is a big tip-off to what is going on. The bass note, or the lowest sounding note, really defines the chord. And so the bass note is important. So what I always suggest when you play hymns is to follow the bass line. Your left hand should outline what's going on in the bass. So whatever I'm doing in the left hand, the first and third beats should have a C as the lowest sounding note, or at least the first beat. Okay, so we want to follow that bass line. We want that C to be the lowest sounding note. Outline the bass, follow the bass line with your left hand, roughly speaking. Now, you're not just going to play the bass, but I see the first measure, the lowest note is a C, so I'm going to make sure I hit that C. Definitely on the first beat. Now, I like to do this back and forth from the C and the G, and that's fine too, as long as we're getting that C in there. All right, and then you notice over here, the third measure, the lowest sounding note is a G, so we want to be hitting that on the first beat. Right? And you can even go back and forth on the first and third, like that. So that bottom note is very important. So that gives us a big clue that this is probably going to be a C chord. But you cannot just go off of one note to know what the chord is. So I encourage you to learn to look at all of these notes and figure out what they are. So this here is a C. This is a middle C. And then we have an E and a G. Now, if we put all those chords together, C, all those notes together, we put C, C, E, and G. What chord do we have? It's a C chord. And it stays that way for most of the whole measure. Here it drops down, and we've only got these notes, still a C chord. And so the whole first measure is a C chord. So now we can fill in our right hand with any note from the C chord. So if you're a beginner, if you're just getting started playing hymns, then fill out your right hand by playing 3 notes in the right hand as much as possible. Okay, so the right hand would look like this. That's what's written. Now, what note from the C chord is missing in the right hand? The C. So on the first measure, I'm going to be playing this. Now here, remember what I said about these passing tones here. We don't have to worry about figuring out, well, what chord is that? I got to jump to here or jump to here, whatever. Just let it pass. And then you can jump down and play 3 notes here, but the less you move your hand, the better. So that's how I would do it. I would just play what's written right here and fill out those first 3 notes. Like that. And that's how you can fill out your right hand. So first, we analyze the measure. What chord? Is it the same chord throughout the whole measure? Many times it will be. And then we add the notes of that chord to our right hand to fill it out. If you're more comfortable with doing this kind of thing, then you can play a full octave chord. Now what you probably want to do is, instead of playing where it's written, move up an octave and then add the missing note and then double your top note like that. And that's a full octave chord. It gives it a real big sound. Just like that. So you can double that up. But what we have to do first is learn to analyze the chords in the measure. So here, we take a look and just read all 4 notes. Put them together in your mind and say, what chord consists of a C, E, and G? All right, let's keep going. Second measure, same thing. What chord consists of a... Now again, take a look at the first measure, or I'm sorry, the first beat of the measure and the third beat of the measure. And that's going to define what's going on. C, E, and G again. We've got a C chord in the second measure. So the whole first measure, the whole second measure is a C chord. Now look what's going on beat number 2. We have an F, an A, and a C. Now if we were to line those up, here's 2 C's and an F and an A. What chord is this? Well, if you know your 3 chords, your 3 major chords in the key of C, it's the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. That's C, F, and G. This looks like an F chord. But remember, that's the second beat. And so it's not defining the chord of the measure. It's kind of just passing by. And so you can think of it as a passing tone. So the chord stays the same. And it just kind of, those notes just kind of pass by. Again, that first beat and the third beat is what defines the note. So the whole first 2 measures we can play as a C chord, and this is a simple song to start learning how to analyze, because it stays the same for much of the song. So how are we going to fill it in? Well, let's go ahead and same way we did it before. We can take and play a 3-note chord. There you go. It's starting to sound like a more full sound. So let's go ahead and play it by playing the first 2 measures with 3 notes in the right hand. And again, when we get to this part, I'm just going to play it like that. I'm not going to jump down. I'm just going to make my job easy by going right there. Okay, this is how we could do it. There you go. Now the left hand, you can just play an octave down here, and that sounds fine. You can bounce between the root and the 5th. See that? You can do it. You can double it up. Okay. I personally like, and I think it just makes it sound more full, is if you come up and play a chord. You can come up and play a chord on the 2nd and 4th beat. 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Like this. Or you can do it just to make your job easier, just on the 1st and the 3rd. But I like to get that chord in there. It just fills it out. And, playing the octave down here, that sounds great too. And if you're this is all new to you, that's a simpler option. But if you're comfortable doing that, try to come up and hit the chord every once in a while, whether it be every beat or every other beat. That left hand to come up. And again, you can improvise and add and play as much as you want within the chord of C. So again, you can expand your right hand to play a full octave, and then jump up here and play this chord, you know. All these options are open once you understand, hey, I'm playing the chord is C, and now I'm going to start adding to it. And there's so much more we can do also with these chords. You can add notes that that aren't in just the triad. We can add more colorful notes like the 13 here, or the 6 you might call it, or the 9, and play it with more color. But we got to start with the basics, the C chord, and fill it out. Play more notes of the C chord, whatever that is for you. Now we jump to measure number 3. What's going on in measure number 3? The chord changes. Let's take a look. Let's stack up our notes. We've got the first note down here is G. Then we've got a D. Then we've got an F right here. And then a B. What have we got? Well, this makes a G chord. G, B, and D. And then what is this F? Remember, the G is the 5 chord in the key of C, and the 5 chord always has the dominant 7th that is natural to that key. And so that's what we've got going on here. Many times you'll see the 5 chord with the dominant 7th. So that's the chord right there. Now we don't have to play, we don't have to play all the notes, but it gives us a lot more options here because we've got 4 notes to use. So let's play 3 notes in the right hand. That's what's written. What's missing? Well, a G is missing, or a D. We can play both. We can play one. We can play the other. I like to play it this way. I add the D. I leave the G out, and the G is down here. Okay? Now, again, we're moving again. We play. Okay, but these, right there in the end of the measure, they are like passing tones, just like over here. So just keep the G going strong, and it'll sound. It's going to sound fine because the first and the third beat are G. So don't let all this movement throw you. The chord stays consistent. It's still a G throughout this whole measure. Okay, so or you can just play 3, come up and fill out a full chord right here, like that. You can choose any one of them, anything. It all works, or all of them. Just give it a bigger sound. Okay, so when I'm playing octaves up here, notice that when I come down, I just walk the octaves down. Again, you want to make sure you hit a full chord as much as possible on that first beat, and on the third beat. The rest, you can just play the one note, or just walk the octave down, or what have you, because those are less important. But if you really emphasize, you notice that really keeps it moving and keeps everything together. So emphasize and make sure, as long as you're nailing the first beat and the third beat, even if you mess up or miss a note here and there in between, it's all going to come together. Again, I demonstrated just playing the first and third beat. It works. Years I spent in vanity and pride, carrying out my Lord was crucified. So it works like that. But, again, we want to fill in. So we want to play more, not less. Here we go back to the C chord. And again, you can analyze that starting down here. What is the C? Okay, we got the C down here, the G. Here's a middle C and then an E. So what does that give us? A C chord. Now we've got the same thing going on here where we've got this F and A on the second beat. But again, we don't have to change the chord for that second beat. Now you can, but I personally think it's so much more helpful, especially when you're playing with like for congregational singing, to keep it consistent. And so keep it a consistent C chord instead of trying to bounce it. It sounds fine, but I think it's better for a congregation as they're singing, or if you're trying to, play with accompany somebody, that it stays consistent. The chord changes consistently. The chord change, consistent chord changes, really keeps the song, keeps it together, and keeps everything moving together. So let's continue moving on. Again, remember that bass note is important. It's important to hit this on the first beat. And even though you can, a G is in the C chord, so why don't I hit a G on the first beat? Follow the bass line. If there's a C, then you want to hit that. Now take a look at if there's movement in the bass line. It's good to follow that too. Look what's happening here. In this measure, C, 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 and then the bass line moves to E, and that's moving. It's leading us to this F here. Now this here is a D minor chord, but again, rather than playing a D on the bottom, it's a good idea to follow the bass line. And so play an F in the bass with this D minor chord, and then a G here, and then a C. Alright, so this measure, if we follow the bass line, would sound like this. It's important that we get that in there. Alright, so again, I'm playing big chords in the right hand. I'm adding some stuff to the left hand, but when that left hand moves, I want to follow it. It just is very important that we follow that bass line. And it's not the end of the world if you don't, but it really adds a lot when we get the bass line movement. Again, this movement is leading us to this next chord. It just sounds great. That lead in sounds great. So you hear the bass doing that dun 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 dun, and it really brings it really adds a whole new feel to it. So here we are. We got another C chord here. Again, you can just go ahead and get used to what you're going to do when you first start trying to do this. Is you might get a little frustrated as you look at these chords. And you're like, oh my goodness, it's so confusing. My brain hurts as I try to look at this and figure out what's going on. I've got them already written up here, so it's kind of easy here. But you take a song that you haven't done this before with, and you start looking at what's going on. It is hard at first, but the only way it gets easier is you do it more. Like I said at the beginning, it's kind of like learning a new language, and so you've got to start. You got to start somewhere. And what the key to learning to play hymns and getting well versed in playing hymns, where you can sit down and just open the hymn book anywhere and play, is to just play more. And learn how to analyze the chord, keeping in mind that, hey, I want to follow the bass line. The chord needs to change consistently, either every measure or every 2 beats, if we're talking in 4/4 time. And that chord change needs to be consistent. I need to nail the first and the third beats. And as long as I do that, let's take it away and see what we can do. And again, the first time you do that, you're gonna have to analyze. You're gonna be writing chords in. You're gonna be, this is hard. But the only way it gets easier is you do it more and do it a lot, and you're going to find yourself, being able to look at a measure and instantly see. This measure, the chord changes every 2 beats. So remember I told you the chord change needs to be consistent. Throughout most of the song, it's changing. It changes at the beginning of the measure. So it's C, C, and it changes here, but then here it changes D minor to G to C, and it changes twice in the measure, or every 2 beats. So here we will go ahead and analyze what's going on in this measure. Again, when you first start, it's going to take time, it's going to be hard, but you'll be able to recognize these much more easily when you do this more. So right here, what's going on here? Well, we've got an F down here, then this is an A, then we've got another F, and then a D. So what chord is that? A D minor. So I've got it written up here already, but that's how you figure it out. what chords are being used, put them, stack them all up, see what we've got. It may take you a minute. Oh, there it is, D minor. And so that's what we're going to play. We can use any of these notes here to fill in what we're playing in our right hand. That's what's written. We can add that note. We can double up the melody to make it a full chord and fill in that way. So we want to play just like that. Now, the next chord. Again, we analyze. Go ahead and start here. Okay, there's a G. Then we've got an F and a B. Now, what is that? G, an F, and a B. Well, I've already got G7 written there, but what if I didn't have it written there? Would you be able to figure that out from just 3 notes? When they don't seem to make a normal triad, well, the note that's missing is a D, but it is a G7, and it just has the 5 not notated. So it's G7, and you can, again, use all these notes to fill in this beat. Any of these options to fill it in, to play more, to give it a fuller sound. There you go. And then this is a G, this is a C. Again, we've analyzed from the bottom. We've got a C, a G, E, and then another C gives us, obviously, a C chord. So if we can fill in our hands with the notes of the C chord, like that. All right. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to play chords down here. This is a muddy sound, and when you're playing a lot of notes up here, it just kind of gets all muddled down there. So that's why you always see me when I'm down here, I'm hitting an octave or maybe just one note, like that. So that's a good rule of thumb. When you get down here, octaves sound great. I mean, it's just perfect. As it nails and drives home the chord. So let's go ahead and play through what I have thus far, and just adding a little bit. I'll first add just a triad. Here we go. And then adding a full chord and some left hand movement. Again, if you want to do more with your left hand, play the octave and then come up and play the chord. Any one of these. And then also I like to alternate in 4/4 time. On the first beat, play a C, but then on the third beat, play the 5. Alright, so you can do that. Or if you're just going to play every other beat, then it's just C chord. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So these options. I'm going to play every beat, and here we go. I forgot to follow the bass. I wasn't looking at it, but the bass there goes. So that's what you do there. Okay, so hopefully you're catching on. You're seeing how we fill in. Now, as far as filling in, you don't just sit down and do it. It does take a lot of practice. But what is going to help you is analyzing hymns. So if you desire to be able to play hymns and to be able to open the hymn book and be able to play anything that maybe the song leader mentions, then what you need to do is just play more. And open the hymn book, figure out what key we're in, write the 3 major chords, and then go through each measure and analyze. What chord is here? When does the chord change? Is it every beat? Is it every measure? Is it twice in a measure? What's going on here? Look at the bass note and follow the bass line, and then practice. And when you first start, it is going to be rough, right? It's going to have to go very slow, and you're going to have to stop and figure out what is that chord and what notes, and now I forget. But the more you do it, then it's going to become second nature. And so it is kind of like learning to speak a new language. Okay, let's jump into this measure right here. Now we've got the first instance of an F chord. So here we ended on a C chord here. Now we're moving to an F chord. And so how do we figure that out? Well, take a look at the bottom note. It's an F, okay, and then we got a C, and here's an A and another C, so there you have it. We have an F chord, and it stays that way throughout the whole measure. But what's going on here? This is all different. This doesn't go to an F. Well, again, remember, it's not on the first beat, it's on the third beat, so it's not defining the chord. And take a look, again, the bass is staying the same, so that's a good hint that nothing is changing, except we just have a passing tone. Like that. Okay? So it just passes by, and that's what we've got. We've got this B and this E, G sharp. And it kind of gives it this fun, lighthearted sound. You'll hear this quite often, where it goes back and forth from a half step down, and we'll go. So you'll hear that quite often. That's what's going on here. Just alternating from the chord a half step down. It's dissonant, but it just sounds good. It's really a neat technique that is used quite often when it just grabs the chord that's a half step down and then goes back and forth. So say if it's an F, the chord that's a half step down is an E major. All right? They don't go together. They clash, but you can use that to get into that F. So that's what's happening here. There you go. So, by the way, if you're into improvising, if you do some of your own stuff when you play hymns, that's something you can do. I love to do that. So if I'm playing along, sounds great. The chord would be a B. Doesn't go, but we're gonna move off that real quick. It just sounds great. It's a lot of fun. And then we go to the G. So it's something you can use, and that's what's going on here. Oh. So the F, fill it in. You can play 3 notes in the right hand. What's missing? That F. Remember, keep the melody note the top note. That way the song is recognizable. And then fill in the missing note. There it is. Now, when I play it, I don't try to jump to the E like this. I just go ahead and just play what's written here. Back and forth from there. You don't have to worry about it. Again, we're emphasizing the first and the third beat. Those are the most important. Now, what's happening here on measure 10? Here's an exception to the rule. Remember I was telling you that the first and third beat define what's going on in the measure? Here we have a C in the bass, right? So let's stack up our notes and figure out what the chord would be. C, F, and A. What chord is this? What chord has C, F, and A? There it is. It's an F chord. But I have C written here. Why? I thought the first beat defined the chord. Well, also remember another thing that is very defining to a chord is the bottom note. So anytime you have a C on the bottom, it's very possible, very likely that it's going to be a C chord. Now, not always. But that's a good rule of thumb. So here we've got 2 conflicting ideas here. You got the notes of an F chord, but the bass note is a C. Well, what kind of gives us the tip-off is that the C stays throughout the whole measure, and then it moves to what we see notes in the C chord. Right there. So we've just got the first beat is the only one that doesn't fit. And so what this is what we call a suspended. or it's kind of suspended, or it's kind of halting before we get into the chord. It's kind of waiting, and so it keeps us in suspense. So we're waiting for it to move to that C because the bass already got there. Now we've got that C. It's expected, but it's kind of holding it off and making us want it more. All right, so that's the suspended. That happens a lot in music. They use suspension, where we move to the chord all but one note, and it just lingers and then moves into place. So you'll hear this a lot at the end of a song. So we'll use, say we're gonna end this song here. We get down to at Calvary. So we go at Calvary. There it is. There's the suspended. So if you notice, everything went to the C chord. Except for this note. It should go to here. But I waited. I held it there just for a little bit longer, and it suspends, or it keeps us in suspense for a minute until it finally resolves. And so that's what's going on up there. So, alright, and there's lots of variations of that, like the Amen, we're at the end of a lot of songs. So, it's just the same thing. Let's go back to that F, and we're waiting for it to fall back down. So, suspended chords are used all the time, and that's what we've got going on right here. It's just a suspension technique where it keeps us in suspense till it gets to that C again. It's just a technique that keeps it interesting, keeps it exciting, keeps it moving, does the unexpected. So. So, before it moves to that C. So, again, an exception when we analyze. You get to here and you're like, oh, I thought it should be an F chord. Here we've got, the first beat is supposed to define the chord. That's right. But that bottom sounding note is very influential to the chord. So if it's a C, 9 times out of 10 it's a C chord. Especially if it's a C on the first beat. So that's what's going on here. And then we move to the G7 chord again. We got all this. We got this option, this, however you want to fill that in. Last thing we'll talk about right here, before we wrap this up, this here, we have a B flat. Now, where does B flat come from? Why is it here? Well, our next chord is an F, and a dominant chord leads strongly to its 1, to the chord a fourth up, or we'd call it the 1 of that 5. So if we're talking about a G dominant, or meaning it has that 7 in it, so a G chord with an F in it is a G dominant 7. And it wants to go to the C. So what is the C dominant? Well, it's got that B flat in it. But what does the C dominant want to go to? To an F. Because C is the 5 of the F. And we've got that 5 to 1. That's what music revolves around. It's always going from the 5 to the 1. Almost always. So when we're gonna get back into this F chord to just drive it home and to sell it, we throw in that B flat, and it moves us, boom, gives it a punch when we move into that F. So you can do that. Here's something you can do. Anytime a song, the chord changes to the 4 chord, you can add the dominant 7th to the 1 chord to get to it. What's another illustration of this? Well, before we got into the chorus right here. Now, there's no B flat on this one, but throw it in there, right? We're going from C to an F. We can make the 1 chord a dominant chord. We can add a B flat. It's not in the key of C. It doesn't fit, it shouldn't be there, but it sounds good because we're going to the F. Let me demonstrate for you right here. There it is. So you can just hear it, that B flat. Oh, now it's dissonant. Now it needs a resolve. So you can do that anytime in the key of C. If it's going to go, if the chord is changing to an F, you can use the B flat on the B flat on. You can add a B flat to the C, or you can add the 7 to the 1 chord in different key, and it just drives that chord progression home. So let me show you again. All right. So and there's other things we can talk about that kind of you can add to a 1 to 4 progression. Like you can add the augmented. So maybe we can get into that next time because we are out of time. But I love talking about and teaching how to embellish hymns. There's so much more we can get into as well, and we will. So stay tuned as we have more lessons on hymns. And again, practice your scales because that's really going to help you. Every time you sit down to practice, you ought to sit down and go through all the scales you know. And the more you do that, the better you'll get at analyzing and knowing the chords.